Andrew Tate is one of the most talked about people in the world this year, and it's said that he has 7 passports, 15 driver's licenses from different countries, residence permits in 30 countries, and bank accounts all around the world. This is extreme diversification that we talk about, and today I'm going to give you an expert's opinion on what I think about his international strategy. I've seen folks out there who they got some passport in a Caribbean country and suddenly, 6 months later, they're experts. I thought as someone who has been personally studying and actually doing this international diversification stuff for 15 years, helped over 1,000 high net worth clients along the way, helped people save many millions of dollars, get second passports, get residences, figure out global lifestyles, that I should weigh in. I'm Andrew Henderson, founder of Nomad Capitalist. If you are a high net worth individual and you want to legally reduce your taxes, legally diversify yourself with second residences and passports, and grow your freedom, you can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. So let's just take this bit by bit. Someone had sent me something that Andrew Tate said about why he believes in diversification, and so do I. To me, the question about what Andrew Tate is doing is how much diversification is too much diversification. And I'll tell you, when I talk to very high net worth individuals, ultra high net worth individuals, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, on a few occasions even billions of dollars, their life goal is simplicity, number one, and their goal is also keeping things with very good optics, would be the word that's often used. And so we had a gentleman who had several $100 million. This is a couple years ago, and I was proposing many different kinds of passports because he has employees all around the world. He's giving millions of dollars to charity. There's different passports he could get, including ones that you wouldn't see available publicly. And his answer was to say pretty much no to everything because he says, I have to be, as a successful person, accountable. I am occasionally dealing with regulatory bodies. I don't want to have some weird passport, even if it adds diversification. I've also heard, ultra high net worth individuals, and I share this opinion as I have spent many years being extremely diversified. You don't want to have to manage so many of these things. So if you've got 7 different passports, generally speaking, they're going to be valid for 5 to 10 years. The 5-year ones are really annoying. The ones that are also a little bit annoying is if you have a Caribbean passport by investment. The 10-year ones are nicer because unless you're going to go to that country, which if you're living a global citizen lifestyle, if you're Andrew Tate who's living in Romania, you probably don't want to go all the way over to Dominica to renew your passport, so you do it through the mail. It's more forms to fill out and it is harder. It is the typical idea of remote processes for offshore structures, whether it's setting up a company to a lesser extent, whether it's opening a bank account with like a traditional offshore bank in Dominica or something like that. It's a lot more paperwork, and so is renewing your passport. So I can take a passport in a country where I'm going to go that's not an island, and I'll often get it renewed in the same day. And so if I have 7 of those passports, that's good. Now, how am I going to get 7 of those passports? We've talked about a guy who had what is considered to be the largest number of passports. He had 8, and a couple of them are in the Caribbean. And so again, those would have to be renewed, generally speaking, through correspondence, unless you're going in and living in the Caribbean for a little bit every couple of years. The UK, Ireland, this guy had, those were easy enough. But I mean, you're going to get citizenship through your birth, i.e. where you were born. So if you're born in the United States, you're an American. Right? If your parents are a different nationality, you can get that as well. If you get citizenship by investment, let's say in the Caribbean or Turkey, or Malta has quasi-citizenship by investment program, you can add those on. So could you have just 7 citizenship by investment passports? You could. We have a client who would like to get all 5 of the Caribbean citizenship by investment. It's just kind of a hobby for him. And so if you want 7 passports, that's not really that diversified. It has a few fringe benefits, but that's going to be a bit more of a hassle to renew. I don't think having passports itself is generally an issue, other than if you are going and applying for some high-level bank account, they may want to know all of your citizenships. If you're going and applying for a visa to a certain country, which if you have 7 passports, I would hope at least one of them, would get you into all the places that you wanted to go. That's why having and planning for the passports, which is the planning that we do in advance, will make sure you have the passports you need before you try and get the visas that later stop you from getting the right passport. So you want to plan in advance which passports you want based on where you want to travel. If going to the United States is important for you and you're not a U.S. citizen, or you want to give up your U.S. citizenship, you want to plan how are you getting back into the U.S. rather than trying to get back into the U.S. and then screwing it up and then trying to go and get the good passport later, because it's not going to be that easy. But the idea being 7 different passports to renew, not a big issue. If you are, again, applying for bank accounts, if you're applying for visas, you may have to disclose it. If you're applying for certain residence permits, like the UK, for example, what are your passports? Might some bureaucrat in a certain country or at a certain bank look at that and say, we don't like this. I've seen it myself in some cases where if you have a weird passport, you might have like a Swiss bank, for example, say, yeah, we don't deal with folks from this country. And you could be like, yeah, I just rebuilt the opera house for that country, just gave them €1 million. They wanted, the charitable donation. I like the country. It's like, well, hey, listen, that's your passport. We don't differentiate, right? And so there are some cases where that stuff can get in the way. And so I'm a big fan of full disclosure. I'm the goody two-shoes of the offshore business. Anytime someone's like, well, maybe just don't write that one down, like, terrible idea. You will get in trouble. You will lose your passport. You'll lose your whatever. Who knows what can happen. So 7 passports is not the biggest problem, but those are some things that could come up if you have them. And again, it's just a logistical issue. The driver's licenses, I don't necessarily know why you need 15 driver's licenses. I did briefly see an Andrew Tate video. He's like, oh, I get pulled over. You show him this one, I show him that one. Obviously, to me, the goal of global citizenship is not to get in trouble. The goal was not to try and drive, and I'm not saying he did this, but drive 200 kilometers an hour down the freeway where you're not supposed to, and then, here's my Egyptian driving license and get away with it. That's my personal perspective. On the residence permits, he says residence permits in 30 countries. And so that to me is more of a challenge because you look at a lot of residence permits. Now, there's a process that we termed paper residence. We came up with that term a number of years ago. And that's where you can get a residence permit in a country and you're working towards citizenship where the law indicates no specific amount of physical presence to get that. And so oftentimes, not always, but the government will, when you go to apply for your citizenship 3 to 5 years later, well, you've held the residence for 3 to 5 years, whatever the criteria were. We didn't tell you how long you needed to be here. Here's your citizenship. You may have to learn a language, you may have to do something else. There's a case to be made for that. If you have 7 passports and you've developed a good passport portfolio, you probably don't need more residence permits turning into passports. At that point, a residence permit for me would be a country where I didn't want their passport. So I was sitting next to a guy recently on a plane, and he has a big business in Turkey. He said, but I don't want the Turkish passport. He says, I could get it through the investment program, but I just don't want it, so I have a residence permit. Countries like the UAE, Singapore, have some degree of naturalization. Occasionally the UAE is opening up, but generally speaking, those are places, as with most places in Asia, Malaysia, Thailand, what have you, you're generally not going to become a naturalized citizen. So if you want to live in Thailand, you should have a Thai residence permit, particularly because countries these days, Mexico being the latest, are cracking down on people living on tourist visas. In the olden days, someone like Andrew Tate, my guess, would be living the perpetual tourist lifestyle where it's like, hey, I don't need a residence permit in Mexico. I have whatever passport that gets me in for 180 days. And you could go to Mexico, spend that 6 months, leave for a little while, come back, they'd give you another 6 months, no mas. And so now, I think if you can afford it, residence permits are the thing to have. To be a country where I'm either trying to get citizenship, so I can't obtain Mexican citizenship by any investment. If I'm not born in Mexico, if my parents aren't Mexican, I'm going to have to wait. I can speed the process up through marriage or by having a child there, or I can just wait the proper number of years with a temporary and then permanent residence. And so if I want to be a Mexican citizen, listen, if I have 7 other passports, I may just, again, want to be a Mexican permanent resident. You have to ascertain before you naturalize in a country where you've got a residence permit, am I treated better as a foreigner or better as a citizen? And you could look at that from freedom of movement. You could look at that from a tax perspective. Sometimes you're better off as a resident. And so those are the residence permits that I have if I have 7 passports. Would I want to have 30 residence permits of all places I'm going to live or want to be a citizen of? No. Now, I don't even, 30, that seems like, I had a friend of mine call me up, and he's done some work with us, and he's like, I have no idea how you did it. I have no idea how you get the residence permits, the banks, the passports, because I'm trying to set up like 1 or 2 residence permits, and I'm pulling my hair out with the bureaucracy. When we create and execute holistic plans for our clients, there are hiccups. This stuff, especially in some of these countries, can be a little frustrating at times. But the idea is understanding what you're getting into and making the process go more smoothly. And so 30 residence permits that you're doing that on your own, or even with some lawyer where they don't provide much support, that's a lot of work. I don't even know how you do that. But the bigger issue that I was going to mention was, let's say you're a UAE resident. You've generally got to go there 1 day every 6 months, every 180 days. So that means you're going 3 times a year, because there's more than 360 days in a year, or you're going twice a year, you're staying a couple days each, so that way there's only 180 in between it. I can tell you, I'm between Europe and Asia all the time. Popping over in Dubai, if that's not somewhere where I actually live or anywhere in the UAE, it's a challenge, right? And it's not, I don't usually fly in Emirates or Etihad, so it's like I've got to adjust what I'm doing, and the schedules are off. I mean, it's always like, oh, I'll put it off till later. And so imagine that times 30. Not all these countries require you to go there. Costa Rica, for example, just changed their policy to where you don't really need to go there, but if you want to then renew your residence permit, you've got to be bringing in like extra police reports and stuff. So you're going to pay for it one way or the other, even if you don't need to be there. In many cases, these residence permits require maintenance. Citizenship, in almost all cases, requires no maintenance. There are some conditions in like Ireland, for example, where if you become naturalized and then you never come back, they may, they'll frown on that. I think Paraguay had some kind of condition for going every once in a while. But generally speaking, a citizen's a citizen's a citizen. And in the case of a Caribbean citizenship by investment, you don't even need to go there ever in 4 to 5 of them. And so maintaining 30 seems incredibly complicated. Now, I don't know his residence permit portfolio. I will say that you can have a residence permit in, let's say, a Schengen member country in Europe. So you can get a Portugal Golden Visa. That requires 7 days per year. That then offers you the access that if you were to fly into Zurich, you can spend a couple days in Zurich. There is a limitation on how much time you're supposed to spend there. And then you can be on your merry way to Portugal. So you're getting access to Europe in general. A Caribbean citizenship gives you a higher level of access to the other Eastern Caribbean countries, 6 in total. If you're Australian citizen, you can go to New Zealand, that kind of thing. So those residence permits, somebody might make the assumption that because they have access to a certain number of countries, that's where they hold residence permits. Somebody once came and told me, we're getting citizenship from a guy, and he told us we're going to be a citizen of 6 countries. And I'm like, no. You're a citizen of 1 country, but you have this higher level of access to the other countries. Kind of like if you're an American, you live in California, but you're welcome to move to Arizona. Not everybody can do that. So the residence permits to be the most challenging ones. Now, he's got bank accounts in 40 countries. To my point about the ultra high net worth individuals that we've worked with, simplicity is worth something. I've come up with the idea of having what's called tunnels, where you open a bank account, you put some money in there, and you forget about it. Now, the challenge with that is I opened a tunnel in Poland a number of years ago, about 5 years ago. And I think that bank said, hey, if you don't move in some nominal amount of Polish zloty every month, we're going to charge you a convenience fee. And I just never really bothered to move it in. They basically just want the account to be used. Hey, bring in $100 a month kind of thing. That way this account remains on the top of your mind and we'll get your money. I didn't, and so I would imagine by now this 8 zloty a month fee or whatever it is, here we are 60 months later, has eaten up a lot of the money that I put in this small bank account. The idea of having banking tunnels is bank accounts are harder to get around the world. Now, if you've got 7 citizenships and 30 residence permits, you're going to have plenty of countries where they may require you to open a bank account as a condition of having residence, and if certainly not, you should be able to open a bank account. That said, some banks, if you're just a citizen, like let's say you get a Caribbean citizenship by investment, you think, oh, I'm going to Antigua and opening my bank account. You don't have any connections with Antigua, they're going to tell you. And so I think some banks, if they believe that you don't have any connections with the country, may not open a bank account in that place. And so now you're looking at banking in non-resident countries. And so, let's say that you want to bank in Georgia. Georgia has the Georgian lari, very high interest rates. Currency has actually done well against the US dollar. If that's something that you're interested in, you would go to Georgia. They're going to pay you a little bit less interest as a non-resident, but they'll open a bank account for you. And so the question is, do those bank accounts have fees? Do they need to be maintained? My Bank of Georgia card is good for 2 years. It drives me nuts. I go to Georgia, and I'm in Georgia often enough, but I go to Georgia. Why can't you guys make it like 4 years or 5 years? Like I've got American Express cards good to 2028 or something. Like that's what I'm looking for. And so maintaining those bank accounts is a challenge if you want access to the money. And there's nothing wrong with just having a bank account and saying, I'm going to put 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, whatever the amount is that you feel is nominal in an account, not have a card. In some cases, like I have in Montenegro, I have a bank, there's not even online access. You just go there every once in a while, okay, here's how much money you have. Maybe they charge you €1 a month, maybe they charge you nothing. Again, maybe there's some way to waive the fee, maybe you keep a certain balance, whatever. So, your money is going to get eaten up in some of these accounts. And so you look at Eastern Europe, like the Balkans, for example, Montenegro, they're a fan of charging you, €1, €2, €3 a month for the service. There's really no way in many cases to avoid that. And so over time, it's not a lot of money, but it's just annoying to watch your little tunnel be depleted. And so what I think is maybe a better thing for most people is have a couple of tunnels, right? Figure that Georgia won't open non-resident bank accounts forever. They may for the foreseeable future, but Armenia next door largely cut it off recently. And so Who knows when that bank account opportunity is gone? Who knows when you can open an account with a very small amount of money, have access to hold foreign currencies, be able to earn higher interest rates. If that goes away, you might be grandfathered in if you're already there, but you won't. So I understand the 40 bank accounts. I've probably come close to that at some point. If you're an American, that's a heck of a lot of bank accounts to report on an FBAR, and so you have to be conscious of that if you are a U.S. person for tax purposes. But I think that that's the only way I would bank in 40 countries, is just saying, hey, listen, if I have to go there, let's say I've got a home there, let's say I'm a citizen there, I've got some money, and if something happens, I can go to that country and get that money. Not that I'm using it on a daily basis, which is what I would have, maybe one big account like in Singapore, Switzerland, something high level, and then maybe one smaller account. If I am an American, I might continue to use some of my U.S. credit cards. I can do that. If I'm not an American, I'm probably not going to have the option to do that. So the bank accounts seem overwhelming, but if you're just putting it there and you don't mind some kind of user fees and it's just kind of sitting there without access, I can see why that works. And so, part of holistic planning is realizing if you want to put together Andrew Tate's, strategy and you want to replicate this, you can get 7 passports very quickly. Again, there's 5 in the Caribbean you can have in a matter of months by making a donation. You can buy property in Turkey and get that in a matter of months. Montenegro is wrapping up its program. Malta has a program that takes about 18 months called the MEIN Citizenship Program, kind of the creme de la creme. You can, if you are a high-level business person, if you're a philanthropist, there's other opportunities. You can get paper residence, you can check your family tree, you can move somewhere and wait to be naturalized. 7 passports aren't that hard to get. Again, it's the other things where you're going to be facing constant bank issues, constant residence permit questions, constant things. If you've got to go every year to maintain the residence permit, you've got to check in. In Thailand, for example, there's a residence permit, you've got to spend 1 day every year, and from the people I've seen, it's a relatively full day sitting in the immigration office. Is life too short to spend 1/365th of your life if you've got 30 of those? And so for me, passport portfolio, dual citizenship is good. Triple citizenship, I believe right now, is the standard that people who are successful should be aspiring to, and they should be diversified. So if you're American, British, and Australian, you're not diversified, right? We had a guy who was American, British, Australian, and Canadian, and the question was, why do you need to be American if you don't even live in the country and you don't even have any plans to return to the country? And that's not a diversified portfolio. So the citizenships, I think if you had 3 or 4, you'd be well covered as long as they were diversified. Residence permits, at this point, I maintain a couple of them in places where I actually go, or if it's like a tax-free place like the UAE, hey, it's not a bad thing to have. I'm willing to put in the couple days a year at a minimum. I've also let some residence permits where I have properties go, like in Montenegro. It's just not worth the time, even though it's a relatively straightforward process. They kind of make decisions, willy-nilly sometimes because they want you to do the citizenship program. Interesting to see if they go back to just renewing residence permits after the citizenship program ends. But for me, 90-day visa-free travel to Montenegro, that's all the time I'll spend. It just makes my life easier not to bother having that. So you want to have options. You want to have as many options as you can maintain. Again, we make and execute holistic plans for high net worth clients. And so the idea is we're going to walk you through 200 questions throughout the course of a multi-call engagement and figure out what are you really willing to do. Because I think that people think some of this stuff is easier than it seems. Right? You can get citizenships without ever going to the country, whether it's just a correspondence process as in the Caribbean, or whether it's Turkey where you can do power of attorney and you can skip it. You can do some of this stuff to where make it easy on yourself. You can hire someone and pay them. That's what we do, and they'll kind of guide you through the process across all the different jurisdictions. But you also want to make sure that your stuff doesn't conflict with one another. Right? We had a guy who was like, I want to do the Turkish citizenship by investment program, and then he wants to go to next door to Armenia. Well, eventually they're going to start asking questions like, wait a second, you're Armenian and Turkish citizen? You don't want to do stuff like that probably. If you have bank accounts in one place, you shouldn't have bank accounts in the other. If you have a citizenship here, then you don't want this Swiss bank there. That's what holistic planning is all about. And so I think that you don't want to accumulate just endless quantity. I've accumulated a lot of quantity as an R&D machine to share with you and to share with the clients of here's what worked and here's my actual experience, not theory. But you want every piece to add value, and so if you follow some of the wealthiest people that we've worked with, that's their focus. Value, good optics, programs that look good, things that add value, and not a lot of complication that needs to be maintained. The answer is, where do you fall on that spectrum?